Well, good morning. We are going to do another training video here for you. Hopefully this one will be short and sweet. Oftentimes we're going to replace struts on a vehicle. The trend nowadays is moving to replacing the whole assembly. That means the strut spring, the strut mount on the top, that whole assembly. It saves a lot of time if you do that, but obviously it's a lot more expensive. Now, the case of this one, this came off of a 2011 Toyota Highlander. This is a rear strut. This guy uses his Highlander for work, carries quite a bit of weight in the back all the time. So it's actually worn out the springs. The car was sagging in the back. It was bottoming out real easy. So we replaced the whole assembly. So I kept these for this intent, was to show you how to, if you're just gonna replace the strut without replacing the spring and the strut mount, then this is how you do it. Now, I'm spoiled. I was able to purchase one of these from a guy that was going out of business. This is a wall-mounted strut spring compressor. These things are expensive. If you buy one new, it's about 700 bucks. Many of you may have seen the ones you borrow at O'Reilly's or the other parts stores. Little J-hooks with bolts that you have to tighten the spring down. You got to stand on it with your foot and hope it doesn't fly apart on you and hit you in the face or anywhere else. They work in a pinch, but they're not very safe. This is one of the safest setups you can get. Obviously you pay for it, but if you're going to be doing a lot of struts, this might be worth your while. Now, the setup is a little tricky, not too bad, but a little tricky sometimes. These struts especially, if you can look here, these springs are not uniform. They're not the same diameter all the way up and down. So it makes things a little trickier getting them lined up in the machine. What I love about this thing is you have adjustments for each one of these arms here, and you have adjustments on all three of the arms at the top, plus this tilts, so it lets you line up with the spring in just about any configuration that you need to. We have our screw at the top that moves this whole assembly here. These stay stationary at the bottom and allows the strut to set in here. These come down, press the spring down, and then once you get the spring compressed, you can take the nut off. Never take this nut off, ever, until the spring is compressed. You've seen that in videos, you've read that in the book, you've heard that, but someday I might get brave and actually take one outside and try to safely, as safe as I can, zip one of these nuts off and let you see what happens when it does. But I don't know if I want to put myself at risk or not, so don't hold me to that. So what we're going to have to do here is set our spring up into these perches, and you've got to hook all 6 of these arms, preferably at the top and bottom. And like I said, it takes a little bit of a trick to get them all lined up. And that's what I love about this machine, because now that we're getting close, we can make some fine adjustments here and here to help secure. Now we move our top arms into place. We've got one back here at the top. Now that's 5 of the arms now making contact with the spring. The only one not making contact yet is this one. I believe we're going to have to start right there and allow the adjustability of this thing to just take over and finally make contact with this last arm. But now that we've got it set up in there, it's simply a case of using the tool to compress the spring. You may ask, well, how do you know when you have it compressed enough? We'll discover that here shortly. you can tell, the spring is now separated from the strut here. It's lifted off, and it's lifted off at the top. So we now have plenty of compression. Now the only thing left is to grab our wonderful snap-on impact, work it in back here, the 19mm socket, and simply zip the nut off. Slide our strut mount off, and there's the strut. We have bump stop here that cushions if you do bottom the strut out. Your strut mount will hit here instead of banging all the way down to the strut assembly itself. So that's an important piece. Sometimes I've seen these where they're all busted up into pieces because they've bottomed out so many times. So there's your strut assembly. If you go down to the parts store and buy struts, this is what you'll get. You want to reuse this on your new strut. How do we know this one's bad? Well, let's put it on the ground here and see. Still has some pretty good resistance, but these are gas charged shocks. So this should be protruding back out on its own fairly quickly, and it's not. I'm having to assist it to come back out. I've seen shocks or struts where when you take the strut mount loose, these things just collapse. They're so bad. This one, like I said, the strut was worn out, but it was mainly because the spring was so weak because he'd been hauling so many loads in this thing. Probably loads heavier than that vehicle's designed to use. But I've seen worse, but it was time. As soon as we got the new struts on the vehicle, he drove it. He came back just raving how nice it rode, how much better it was. So we fixed his problem. Now, being a rear strut, these things just mount in there and they're stationary, they don't move. If this was a front strut, this top strut mount would actually have a bearing built into it. And if you've got a car that when you set in a parking lot and you turn the wheel and you hear a grinding noise and a popping noise as you turn the wheel, it's probably because you got a bad bearing inside this mount. I've seen that happen and cause a lot of different noises and rattles and grinding noises. So this one, like I said, is stationary, but on a front strut, this is gonna have to pivot because this part will pivot. This mounts into the frame of the car, into the body of the car, and this part here will pivot with the steering. So all that movement is in this bearing right here. So any questions about that, you can email me or text me. Again, you see the spring here, it's still secure. I wouldn't be too afraid about pulling on that a little bit. You just leave that there, you get your new strut, and it's time to reassemble. Again, how do I know how to clock it? Well, the end of the spring on the bottom here sits right in this cradle. You can see this drop. I'll take that off for a second. You can see a drop right here, and you can see the drop in the rubber as well. And that's where the end of the spring butts up. So we know that when we stick it back up in here, we know to clock it correctly. We turn it till the spring is butted there. Also, we have the rubber boot here. That's simply a dust shield, a dust boot to keep road grime and stuff from getting in here onto the polished, shiny shaft of the strut. We don't want dirt and water and stuff protruding down into the strut. That'll just wear it out faster. Take our mount, bring it back over the top. I can hole. There it is right there. I don't know why I'm having trouble getting it to go on. I think I do know. Aha. You may think about orientation. Notice the flat spot? That flat spot has to line up with a flat spot in the mount. I didn't pay attention to that earlier, so I didn't know that. So, now that we have our flat spot figured out, we should be able to get it on there. Amazing how simple that was. Now, I believe there was a spacer in here. And then our nut. See, I'm not infallible here. I left this piece out. I'm not going to take the time to put it back in there because this strut is junk anyway, but don't forget your bump stop when you're putting one together. Now, as you can see, we're back together. Reorient the top. There we go. And there's our strut assembly ready to go back on the car. Simple installation. Top mount goes up through the holes in the body. 3 nuts. Bottom mount. Bolts to the knuckle. You got your brackets for your brake lines, wheel speed sensors, things like that mount here and here. I'll take that back. This is where your anti-sway bar link mounts. So there you go. That's how to swap out a strut.